The detective slid the note across the interrogation room table, his eyes studying my face for any sign of guilt. "Mrs. Mitchell, would you like to explain this?" I looked down at my husband Jack's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm dead. My wife Rebecca killed me. She's been planning it for months. Don't let her get away with this." My hands didn't shake as I pushed the paper back. "I'd like to explain something, Detective Harris," I said calmly, "but probably not what you're expecting." It had been 3 days since Jack disappeared. 3 days since they found his car abandoned by the river, blood splattered across the driver's seat. 3 days of watching my sister Rachel play the part of the devastated sister-in-law, while secretly helping the police build their case against me. What they didn't know was that I'd been building my own case for months. "Go ahead, Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Harris said, leaning back in his chair. "We're all ears." I opened my purse and pulled out a USB drive. "Before I give you this, I need you to understand something. I'm not just going to tell you what happened to Jack. I'm going to show you how he and my sister planned this whole thing, and how they messed up in ways they never imagined." The detective's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're saying your husband faked his own death?" "Yes," I replied, and tried to frame me for it so he and my sister could start a new life together with his life insurance money. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated me. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 days ago, I was married to a man who thought he could destroy my life and get away with it. But I'm also a forensic accountant, and if there's one thing I know, it's that numbers don't lie, even when people do. 6 months earlier, I was working late at my office, combing through financial records for a client when I noticed something odd in my own bank statements. A series of small transfers, carefully spread out to avoid detection, moving money from our joint account to an unknown destination. Most people wouldn't have caught it. The amounts were tiny, $50 here, $75 there, but they added up. Over 3 months, nearly $15,000 had disappeared. I didn't confront Jack immediately. Instead, I did what I do best. I followed the money. The transfers led me to a private account, and from there to a trail of receipts that told a story I wasn't prepared for. Hotel rooms booked under my sister's name. Dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants where Jack claimed he had business meetings. A down payment on a small apartment across town. But the real punch to the gut. A receipt for an engagement ring, purchased 2 weeks earlier. I sat in my dark office that night, staring at the evidence on my computer screen, and made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I would document everything, build an ironclad case, and wait to see what they were planning. I didn't have to wait long. "Honey," Jack said one evening over dinner, his voice carefully casual, "what would you think about increasing my life insurance policy?" I looked up from my plate, keeping my expression neutral. "Oh, why's that?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just thinking about the future, making sure you're taken care of if anything happens to me." I watched him push food around his plate, noting how his left hand trembled slightly, a tell he'd had since I met him. He was lying, and he was nervous about it. "Sure," I said softly. "That makes sense." The policy was increased to $2 million the next day. I started keeping a second set of books. Rachel came over more often after that, playing the role of the caring sister. She'd bring coffee, ask about my day, all while helping her lover plan my destruction. "You work too hard," she said one afternoon, perched on the edge of my desk at home. "You should take a break, maybe go visit Mom for a few days." I smiled, thinking of the hidden camera I'd installed in my home office. "Maybe soon. Things are pretty busy right now." She touched my shoulder, and I wondered if she felt any guilt at all. "You know I'm always here for you, right?" "I know," I replied, and I did know. I knew exactly what she was there for. The pieces of their plan became clearer each day. The life insurance policy, the secret apartment, the carefully orchestrated paper trail making me look unstable, jealous, potentially violent. They thought they were being clever, but they left traces everywhere. Burner phones with texts not quite deleted. Receipts for chemical supplies that could make Jack's blood appear to be in larger quantities than it was. Research on their shared laptop about dissolving bodies in lye. I documented everything, backing up files, photographing evidence, building my case methodically while they built their trap. The day before Jack disappeared, he kissed me goodbye like any other morning. "Love you," he said. and I wondered if he felt anything at all as he said those words. "Love you too," I replied, knowing it would be the last time I said it. 24 hours later, his car was found by the river, and my sister was at my door with tears in her eyes. "Becca," she sobbed, pulling me into a hug. "They found Jack's car. There's so much blood." I held her, feeling her tears soak into my shoulder, and thought about the camera in my necklace recording every moment of her performance. Now, sitting across from Detective Harris, I plugged the USB drive into his computer. "Everything you need is here," I said quietly. "Bank records, photos, videos, communications between them planning this whole thing. And most importantly, proof that Jack is very much alive." The detective's eyes widened as he scrolled through the files. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is extensive." "I'm thorough," I said simply. "It's why I'm good at my job. It's also why they're going to regret ever thinking they could outsmart me." Harris looked up from the screen, his expression shifting from skepticism to something like respect. "Where do you think they are now?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Oh, I know exactly where they are. And in about 20 minutes, so will you." Detective Harris stared at his computer screen, scrolling through the mountain of evidence I collected. "According to these records, your husband purchased one-way tickets to Mexico 2 days ago. Cabo San Lucas," I confirmed. "He and Rachel are staying at the Villa del Arco Resort, room 412, booked under the name James Cooper, his favorite alias. They used my money to pay for it." The detective's brow furrowed. "Your money? Remember those small transfers I mentioned? They weren't as clever as they thought. While they were stealing from our joint account, I was tracking every penny. Last week, I moved most of our assets to a private account, one they can't access." I pulled up my phone and showed him the resort's live webcam feed. There, lounging by the infinity pool, were Jack and Rachel, probably celebrating their successful escape. "They think they've won," I continued. "That I'm here being interrogated for murder while they start their new life. They have no idea I've been 10 steps ahead of them this whole time." Harris picked up his phone, already dialing. "I'll contact the Mexican authorities immediately." "Before you do that," I said, holding up a hand, "there's something else you should see." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were documents that would ensure Jack and Rachel's downfall wasn't just complete, it was spectacular. "These are records of every illegal transaction Jack has made through his company over the past 5 years. Tax evasion, money laundering, fraud. I've been collecting evidence since I first suspected something was wrong in our marriage." The detective's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "Mrs. Mitchell, this could put him away for decades." "I know," I said quietly. "And Rachel too. She's been helping him cook the books since she became his company's accountant 2 years ago. That's how their affair started." I thought back to the day I hired the private investigator who photographed them together outside that hotel. I'd known then, watching them laugh and kiss like teenagers, that my marriage was over. But I'd needed more than just proof of their affair. I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal. "There's something I don't understand," Harris said, looking up from the documents. "Why didn't you confront them when you first discovered the affair? Why go through all this?" I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. "Detective, have you ever been betrayed by the 2 people you trusted most in the world?" He shook his head. "I grew up with Rachel. She was more than my sister, she was my best friend. And Jack, I loved him completely. When I realized they were sleeping together, it broke something in me. But when I discovered they were planning to frame me for murder, that they wanted to destroy my life so they could start over with my money." I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "That's when I decided they needed to learn a lesson about underestimating me." Harris nodded slowly. "And the blood in Jack's car?" "Pig blood," I replied. "Bought from a butcher shop last week. They needed it to look convincing. The receipt is on the USB drive, along with security camera footage of Rachel purchasing it." Just then, Harris's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for a moment, then looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Mexican authorities have them in custody," he said. "They tried to run when the police showed up, but didn't get far. They're being held for questioning until we can arrange extradition." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not relief exactly, but satisfaction. "Let me guess. They're both claiming they have no idea what's going on." Harris nodded. "Jack's demanding to speak with the American embassy. Says he's the victim of a misunderstanding. I couldn't help but laugh. Show him the suicide note. The one where he claims I killed him. I'm sure the embassy will be very interested in how a murder victim managed to write a note from beyond the grave. Mrs. Mitchell, Harris said, his tone serious. You do realize you'll have to testify against both of them. This won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy, detective, I replied. But I've spent 6 months preparing for this moment. I'm ready. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text from Rachel. Becca, please. This isn't what you think. We can explain everything. I showed the message to Harris, who shook his head in disbelief. They still think they can talk their way out of this. They've always underestimated me, I said, deleting the message without responding. It's why we're here, and they're in a Mexican jail. The next few hours were a blur of statements and paperwork. I walked the detective through every piece of evidence, every document, every recording. By the time we finished, the sun was setting over the city. We'll need you to come back tomorrow, Harris said as I gathered my things. There's more paperwork to fill out, and we'll need formal statements about everything. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 3 days was wearing off, leaving me drained. One more thing, Harris added as I reached the door. How did you stay so calm through all of this? Most people would have fallen apart. I turned back to face him. Detective, when someone tries to destroy you, you have 2 choices. You can break down, or you can become unbreakable. I chose the latter. As I walked out of the police station that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Jack, his number showing up as unknown. I know you're behind this, his message read. You've ruined everything. How could you do this to us? I stared at the words, marveling at his audacity. Even now, caught in his own trap, he was trying to make me the villain. I typed out a response. No, Jack. You and Rachel ruined everything when you decided to frame me for murder. I just made sure you faced the consequences. Then I blocked his number, got in my car, and drove home to the house that was now mine alone. I woke the next morning to breaking news headlines splashed across my phone. Local businessman and sister-in-law arrested in murder hoax. The story was everywhere, complete with their mugshots from Mexican custody. Jack looked shell-shocked, his normally perfect hair disheveled. Rachel's makeup was streaked with tears. Within hours, my phone was flooded with messages from friends, family, and coworkers. Everyone wanted to know how I was holding up, how I'd discovered their plan, whether I'd seen the signs before it was too late. I ignored them all and drove to the police station for my formal statement. Detective Harris was waiting with a cup of coffee and a thick stack of papers. You've caused quite a stir, Mrs. Mitchell. The DA is very interested in this case. I imagine he is, I replied, settling into the chair across from him. How are our lovebirds doing in Mexico? Not well, he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. They're being extradited today. Jack's company board has already voted to remove him as CEO, and they're launching their own investigation into the financial crimes you uncovered. I nodded, unsurprised. They'll find more. Jack's been embezzling for years. I only scratched the surface in my investigation. About that, Harris leaned forward. How did you know to start looking into his finances in the first place? I took a sip of coffee, remembering the moment everything changed. It was something Rachel said at Christmas last year. We were talking about Jack's company, and she mentioned how clever he was with creative accounting. The way she said it, there was this intimacy in her voice, like she was proud of him. That's when I knew. Knew they were having an affair. Knew they were up to something bigger, I corrected. The affair was just part of it. They were planning something, and I needed to find out what. As I finished giving my statement, Harris's phone buzzed. He checked it and looked up at me. They've landed. Want to watch their perk walk? I considered it for a moment. No, I said finally. I have somewhere else to be. That somewhere was Jack's company headquarters, where I had an appointment with the board of directors. They needed to understand the full scope of what Jack had done, and how I could help them fix it. I spent 3 hours walking them through the evidence, explaining how Jack had manipulated the books, where the missing money had gone. By the time I finished, they had offered me a consulting contract to help clean up the mess. Mrs. Mitchell, the board chairman said as I prepared to leave, I have to ask. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I met his gaze steadily, because I needed to understand everything first. Not just the affairs or the fraud, but who they really were, what they were capable of. He nodded thoughtfully. And now? Now they can face the consequences of their actions, I said simply. All of them. The preliminary hearing was set for the following week. I sat in a courtroom, watching as Jack and Rachel were led in wearing orange jumpsuits. They wouldn't look at me, but I could see them whispering to each other when they thought no one was watching. Their lawyers tried to paint it as a lover's mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fraud charges alone carried a minimum sentence of 15 years. The attempted framing, the insurance fraud, the theft, it all added up. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my head held high. Jack finally looked at me then, his eyes pleading for mercy. Rachel stared at her hands, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Mrs. Mitchell, the prosecutor began, please tell the court how you discovered your husband and sister's plan. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them everything. The suspicious transfers, the secret meetings, the carefully orchestrated plan to frame me for murder. With each word, I watched Jack and Rachel shrink further into themselves. And what made you decide to gather evidence rather than confront them immediately? The prosecutor asked. I looked directly at Jack as I answered, because they thought I was weak. They thought I was so blinded by love and trust that I wouldn't see what was right in front of me. They underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake. The trial lasted 2 weeks. In the end, Jack was sentenced to 20 years for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted insurance fraud. Rachel got 12 years for her role in the scheme. They were both ordered to repay the money they'd stolen, plus damages. As they were led away, Rachel turned to me one last time. I'm sorry, Becca, she whispered. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't respond. Her words meant nothing now. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. I gave them one sentence. The truth always comes out. That evening, I sat alone in my home office, looking at old photos of happier times. My wedding day, family vacations, holidays where we all smiled and pretended everything was perfect. I took each photo out of its frame and dropped them into a box marked Donate. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Harris. You okay? I thought about his question carefully before responding. Was I okay? My husband and sister were in prison. My family was shattered. My life had been completely upended. But I was still standing, still fighting, still winning. Yes, I texted back. I'm more than okay. I'm free. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and walked out of the office. Tomorrow, I would start my new consulting job. Next week, I would look at houses in a new neighborhood. In a month, I would take that vacation to Italy I'd always dreamed about. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that I had turned their betrayal into my triumph. They had tried to write my ending, but I had written my own beginning instead.